All right, welcome back. And I'm joined by the Oaklandside newsroom. Welcome, everybody. So I'm going to go around and just ask everyone to introduce themselves. And I think you all see what I see. So to my left is Darwin. And why don't you take it away and then just kind of everyone pass the ball around the entire room here. And then we'll dive into some questions. But Darwin, go ahead.
Yeah, I'm Darwin Bond-Graham. I'm the news editor at the Oaklandside. And I see Natalie to my left.
Hi, everyone. I'm Natalie Ornstein. I cover housing and homelessness for the Oaklandside. And Amir is below me.
Nice. My name is Amir Aziz, and I'm the visual journalist at Oaklandside. And Tessany was to my right, actually.
It's like our own version of Hollywood Squares. Hi, everyone. I'm Tessany Raja. I'm the editor-in-chief of the Oaklandside, and we had Ashley. We're going to hop over to Ashley.
Okay. Hi, my name is Ashley Mcbride. I cover education equity for the Oaklandside. And let's see, Darwin already went, so Azu.
Hi, everyone. I'm Susana. I'm the arts and community reporter for Oaklandside.
And I think to your right, Azu, is
Ricky. Yes.
Hi, everybody. My name is Ricky Rolas, and I cover small businesses in this beautiful city.
So I want to throw the first question out to Amir as the visual journalist.
Jacob.
Oh, no, we're missing Jacob. Come on now.
Hey, Joaquin, what's up? Hey, y'all, this is Jacob. Jacob, it's okay. It's like a musical chairs thing. We kept kind of moving around. Jacob Simas, I'm the managing editor of the Oaklandside.
Okay, but I'm still giving the first question to Amir. And again, for folks who are watching, thank you for being with us. Please, you can get questions into the chat. I've got a couple that I've been pulling out of the thread as we go along. But Amir, as a visual journalist, there's a lot of different intersections in Oakland. So when you talk to us a little bit about your process when you go out on a story, are you working with the reporter? Are you doing are you starting the thread? Like what does that mean to be a visual journalist inside the Oaklandside newsroom?
Yeah, that's a great question. Process depends on the story. So with reporters, we have a lot of stories I work with reporters on. As of late, because things are opening back up, we've been able to go together to the source or to the location or event where the story's taking place, and they'll do the reporting and I'll take photos at the same time. That's been really great as of late to do that with the team. Sometimes also I pitch stories, so I may go to an event that I'm particularly interested in us hosting as a story on the website. So I'll just go and get some quotes or take photographs and then report back. And my process, depending on the story, I think about who's there, what community is there, what the environment is like, how the story engages. I've experienced these different areas to determine how I approach people. So, in Fruitvale, growing up in Oakland, Fruitvale was like the place you would go with, if you want to eat Mexican food, and there's a huge Latino population there, obviously. So with that in mind, with Azucena being able to go, there's a lot of folks who are of different status and different language than myself. So with that, Azucena is able to translate, and it's been a great experience, like I mentioned, to be able to communicate with people and ask them things without myself knowing the language.
So that is kind of a partnership. Then I do always have a question though. When you show up with the camera, are people like, what are you doing? Like, do you ask permission? Like, just give us a little bit about how it actually happens.
Yeah, depends on what lens I'm bringing. Sometimes it's a little intimidating to have this huge lens, and folks will ask like who I'm with or what I'm doing. But at times there are folks that are familiar with me already, and I've been doing this 10 years or so, so it's already kind of established. Like, I'm here to take pictures. You probably know where it's going. So there's a huge trust component when I show up with technology that I'm there to capture stories, and it's in good hands.
You're getting some love in the chat from Gene, so thank you, Gene. One of the ones I don't know if you took the photos, but Ricky, I think today there was a story about the reopening post-COVID for bars. And something that I hope people recognize in the Oakland side is they're not just talking about bars in Uptown or Temescal, but you went into the bar community in East Oakland in Laurel. Can you just give us a little sense of that story, actually? Because I really, really love the fact that you found these little neighborhood places. And are people surprised that you're reporting on small business in places where there are small businesses, which is throughout Oakland, especially in East Oakland, there's still a thriving small business community?
Yeah, so with that story, I was very intentional in choosing businesses from all over. I lament the fact that I wasn't able to do something in Jack London, because the goal was to kind of just do a whole loop around Oakland, just to get that diversity of voices and the little neighborhood bar spots. But I was very intentional about going to Deep East, going to Laurel, just because when I did a call out on Twitter for people's favorite bar spots, they were all in North Oakland, downtown. That's where people go. And yet you got a place like Apartment C that is a neighborhood staple. 40, 50 years it's been there and everybody knows it. But nobody on Twitter is going to suggest it. So that was, I'm glad that we were able to get that mix of voices in there. And as far as your question of like, whether people are surprised for me to go, no, they're never really surprised. It's more like, honestly, they're grateful more than anything. Just because a lot of these spots, nobody has ever took the time to ask, like, hey, can I interview you? Can I ask you your story? So overall, the feeling is just gratitude that I get from people.
Ricky, I want to just double click for a second. When I grew up, the stretch from Fruitvale to High Street was pretty evacuated. Local businesses were struggling. This was the late 70s and 80s. The corner was there as like we still got our clothes there, but most of the storefronts were empty. And then in the 80s, we had this incredible infusion of immigrants, many from Michoacan, who came up and started businesses. And now it's like, it's vibrant. You go closer to the lake, and it was the Southeast Asian immigrant community who brought business back. How do you make sure that when you're reporting on these stories, again, you're contextualizing it so that the vitality, the tax base, that we really get a comprehensive view of what immigrant started businesses delivered to the city?
That's a really good question. I guess it varies from article to article. Like right now I'm thinking about the one that I did about Rasul's Rug Shop back in, I want to say July. It was an Afghani-owned rug store. And the context behind that is that a lot of the Afghani-owned businesses in Oakland, at least like for a certain time when they came here in the 90s, they were rug stores. And so that was something that we worked to put into the article. This particular business was on Grand. It just so happened that a lot of the Afghani businesses were centered in that area. So it varies from story to story, but it's important to put that context in for people to know that like these individual stories are part of a larger community.
Ashley, I want to kind of turn to you, adjacent theme, but you're covering education, and in your conversation with the two young leaders from the Oakland schools, Oakland schools are not one thing, right? There are many things at the neighborhood level, at the board level, at the family level. And Oakland is a constantly evolving place, right? We're still the home to an enormous immigrant community. Where do you find that centering point? Like, how do you actually think about the coverage that you need to work on? And I'm also curious just how sourcing is going for you. Like, are people starting to approach you in terms of like stories that they're trying to get coverage on?
Sure. So on sourcing, I do get emails from people all the time with story ideas. I think in part because for so long there hasn't really been a dedicated Oakland schools reporter here. And so people are just really excited that there's someone who will, listen and write about their stories. And then when I think about my coverage, I think in part, I consider what other news outlets cover about Oakland, and historically it's been kind of sporadic, and a lot of it has been negative things about, budget issues or superintendent turnover or, disciplinary disparities within Oakland schools. And so I try to provide a more balanced picture. I cover school board meetings and write about local policies and resolutions that school board members are working on. But I also like to write about teachers and students. And I like to, focus on student voice a lot because the students here, as everyone heard on Tuesday or Wednesday, are really impressive and have a lot to say about what's going on in their communities.
Give us a little insider's view, because most people might be fans and definitely consume the content, that is on Oaklandside and other news outlets, but they don't know the process. So when you come up with a story idea, do you just start working on it and then come back and show it to an editor? Do you go to an editor first? You got your editors here, so you can do whatever you want in terms of like telling us what happens. But what happens when you start on a story?
So we have our pitch meetings on Mondays, which is when we talk about the stories that we'd like to do for the week. And so sometimes my story ideas come from people who reach out to me or things I heard about in a board meeting or just, following up on stories that I've done previously. And so we talk about it during our meeting. Sometimes editors or even other reporters will give us, ideas for who to talk to or what other angles to examine. And then, once we get the green light, we start working on it.
And so there is a green light. Like, Jacob, how does that work? I'm passing it to you here. You green light stories? Like, what do you push a button? Do you give them a halt? Like, what happens?
There's a green light. Yeah, there's a green light, a metaphorical green light. As Ashley described, we have conversations. This is a really democratic newsroom. I just want to kind of point out the dynamics in our newsroom are incredibly refreshing. Some of us have worked in like multiple newsrooms, and I think there's sometimes a tendency for newsrooms to be like rough and tumble places. People have disagreements, and maybe not everyone gets along or even collaborates all the time. And what's been really great about our newsroom, at least from my vantage point, is that I think by creating space for a lot of conversation, and in creating space for reporters to really, really take ownership of their beats and their work through very lengthy, deep conversations, through meetings, I think we've achieved a place where, as a newsroom, we really respect one another. And decisions are sort of arrived at, together. So we have these deep sort of story conversations on Mondays where reporters bring their ideas to the table. We're a very reporter-driven newsroom. So what I mean by that is as editors, we actually very rarely assign stories. We're really looking to our reporters to bring the ideas to us, and then we have conversations. And most of our conversations have to do with framing and thinking back to, a lot of times our founding values, and is the way we're framing a certain story really delivering on the values that we stated when we launched as a news organization. And then from there, we come to an agreement that, a story is good to go. We sort of collectively as editors, and I think as a team, we'll sort of agree which stories are worth pursuing.
Jacob, I want to go just a little bit further, but next, there are many community voices that we've seen in Oaklandside, and you had a conversation with John Jones earlier in our 3-day event celebration here, and I was not kidding. It should have won a Pulitzer in terms of opinion writing because it was that riveting and cogent. What's it like to work with somebody who's got that deep knowledge, such a sharp perspective, such a strong voice, and is in the issue, working on the issue? Did you edit him? Who edited him?
Yeah, I worked with John on that piece as an editor. And yeah, it was, in a word, it was an honor to work with John on that piece, just to, have him agree to share his personal story on an issue that, I personally feel, and I think I can speak for the team, like the Oaklandside has a responsibility to sort of peel back the layers of complexity to try to understand this issue of violence, and specifically gun violence in Oakland. And so, to get a piece by someone like John Jones, and there's really no one like John Jones. So to get a piece by John on this issue that was really drawing on so much of his own personal experience and lived history in the city of Oakland, and for him to help us peel back those layers through his writing, yeah, it was a total honor. And it's also a lot of work, you know, but it's, you know, work that's well worthwhile. You know, there's no other way to put it. It took weeks and maybe months, well, definitely months for that story to come to fruition, just because of the importance of it, you know, and the importance of sort of getting the narrative right, and the importance of, you know, as an editor, working with a writer to make sure that the final result really reflects not just the lived experience of the person, but their motivations for having written it in the first place, right? So it's great whenever we can, you know, take on larger projects, whether they're first person sort of, you know, voice pieces, or whether they're just long feature, you know, reported pieces. It's great to be able to do that, and it's one of the things that I think we've done really well collectively.
Azu, you know, on this idea of elevating voices in the community, you cover arts and community. The arts is another really critical economic driver, political driver, social driver in and around the city of Oakland. Where do you start, though, right? Are you looking for people who have incredible established sort of leadership positions, careers? Fabiana and Kev are two institutions, incredible voices in Oakland. Where do you start digging for those stories?
I think it changed during the pandemic, obviously, which is when I started with Oaklandside, where before a pre-pandemic world, you know, I was going out, you know, to different events, different places, galleries, you know, cultural events, and that's where I would meet people, unsuspected people, not necessarily well-established artists or anything like that. Which not that they don't deserve flowers, of course they do, but yeah, oftentimes it's just those like unsuspected artists and unsuspected stories that I like the best, and that's how I was kind of finding those. And then during the pandemic, it really kind of started. I mean, Instagram, on social media, really, you know, pages that I would follow, you know, accounts that I would follow, things that other friends or people that I know would post, and that's how I was finding stories. Or even when I kind of started slowly venturing out again, out into the world, there was a particular story that I wasn't quite sure, that I felt that was too niche, and I wasn't sure if it was going to resonate with a lot of readers, but I found her important. And it happened that I was going to get a gift for my brother-in-law in Fruitvale, and I walked into this like unsuspected little shop right on International on East 14. And from walking into the shop, seeing the owner and like all the work, the work that he was doing inside the shop, I said, hey, oh my God, this could be such a good story. And I pitched it to the editors. And I think at first the editors were like, what? But they're like, yeah, go for it. But Darren was like, yeah, that's a great story. Let's do it.
What was the gift? Did you buy your brother-in-law something?
Yeah, I ended up buying him a little leather keychain, but it was an engraved leather keychain, which I actually hadn't seen like done like right there and then before. I mean, I know that they sell them, but so the guy, the owner of the shop, just so happened that he does that work, and he's from the state in Mexico where it's known for like leather goods. So just
what state are you referring to?
It's you're catching me off guard now. I can't.
We'll come back to it.
Yeah, we'll come back to it. But anyway, seeing him, you know, kind of like doing the work and like telling me like, yeah, if you want, we can use like this letter, we can use like this design. It just, I don't know, I felt like there was a story there. So I pitched it. You know, I ended up going with Amir for photos, and yeah, Amir took some great photos. And so after the story was published, they sent a story to our cohort, which I think you've talked about earlier in the week. And, you know, the feedback from the cohort, they loved it. they love the story, and they said, hey, like these are the kind of stories that we want to read. Like it really shows what Oakland is about. It really shows about like people that have built community here. And yeah, that was probably one of those like unsuspected, he's obviously not a known artist by any means. He's like, just a business owner in Fruitvale. So yeah, that's probably one of like those kind of unsuspected stories that happened it happened because I walked in the shop to buy a gift.
I will not ask you if your brother-in-law appreciated that gift, and we're just going to assume he did. Tasneem, Azu's mentioning this cohort, and I don't know if we've actually explained that fully to our audience here, what she's referring to. Do you mind giving us a little insight? And you're on mute. We'll come back. We're going to rotate around. Well, let me ask you this question, Darwin, because I was going to actually hopscotch from this idea of the cohort. We will come back to Tasneem on this. We could start a newsroom in Oakland that only covers a single issue. You could have 10 people cover education and not run out of critical stories. You're one of the country's best local reporters when it comes to policing. We could have 25 reporters cover policing in Oakland and not get all of the stories done. Why is it important to have arts and culture, to kind of have a diverse set of small business reporter as part of a local newsroom? Why not just go deep on a single topic?
I mean, obviously, because we're not a specialized reporting shop. We're not trying to only focus on one thing. We're not an industry trade publication. We don't specialize only in like investigative reporting. We're not a criminal justice publication. We're not an education publication. We are a publication for Oakland. We're a media organization for the city and the many communities of people that live here, that work here, that go to schools here, that are employed by companies here, that have small businesses here, people who have immigrated here, people who have families that go back many generations here. And to try to even begin to tell all of those stories, we knew that we'd have to have a pretty diverse set of like beats that we were gonna like dig into. I'll say the existing beats that we do have, education equity, housing and homelessness, arts and community, immigration and small business, city hall and policing. That barely scratches the surface of like the actual coverage that we need to be doing, but we felt like those were the crucial, some of the most crucial beats that we needed to like actually provide consistent coverage of, because there are huge communities of people in Oakland who care deeply about education issues and public schools. The arts and community beat itself, like we knew that would just be like kind of make or break for us. Housing and homelessness, homelessness in recent years, it's like possibly the biggest single story, the biggest, most pressing issue facing the city of Oakland. So we knew that we needed that kind of reporting. And small business and immigrant-owned businesses. It's sort of like you said toward the beginning of the conversation. Oakland's gone through these cycles where the city has been really disrupted and harmed by these national and global economic forces and policies beyond our control. But the people who live here are really resilient and constantly like creating new businesses, entrepreneurialism. Workers here and the way that they organize through collectives and labor unions. These are really important stories to tell. So we knew we needed someone like Ricky Rodas to bring on to tell those stories.
Yeah, and Tasneem, do we have you on audio now?
Can you hear me?
It sounds like you're in a spaceship.
Yeah, it's okay. Go on.
Okay. Natalie, I'm gonna sort of pivot, and Darwin, I want your help with this part of the conversation because you mentioned housing. And again, somebody who grew up in Oakland, if you drive any stretch, you're confronted with what is a complete collapse of our social safety net, frankly. This is a crisis. Like policing in Oakland, it seems almost unsolvable, or we have almost learned to live with it in a way that would, should frighten us all. So Natalie, as you've come in to cover the story, and again, your piece, I thought was quite powerful and also very, very close to the source of course, with the subject that you were interviewing. But how do you sort of develop your plan for how to cover this? You can't just go story to story because you'll never be able to zoom out, right? So how do you kind of bring that longer term, more longitudinal perspective to your coverage?
Yeah, I think that's something we all probably struggle with to some effect, where we're trying to balance this like ever churning cycle of new policies coming out, and how do we keep our readership and community apprised of the really current and urgent decisions that are being made on all these topics, while also putting them in a context to help people like understand how they fit into decades of sociopolitical history, and what they might say about what's possible going forward. So housing and homelessness, I don't know that I strike that balance completely perfectly at all. I often feel like it's really important to cover, hey, this new policy that's incredibly controversial about where people are and aren't allowed to sleep outside, that's going to affect thousands of people's daily lives immediately. We got to cover that. We got to cover the decision that the city council makes on that. But I do appreciate that at the Oaklandside, I think all of my editors share the feeling that I and my coworkers have, that we can't only do that. And I mean, that's something that they've instilled in us as well. And so, you know, I just, they gave me the leeway to do a like 5,000 word article on the decades of history of single family zoning in Oakland, a policy that's arose from racist sentiments in a lot of different neighborhoods in Oakland, and then look at how is it going to play out to undo that policy in many different neighborhoods. So I both covered the immediate decision that the city council made in a really quick news story, and then got this chance to kind of step back and bring all these different threads together in a broader look.
And doing that during the pandemic, I mean, this is many of us were worried, obviously from a public health perspective, about what the possible tragic outcomes could be in the unhoused population that we have in our city, that are part of our city. How did you manage your reporting throughout the pandemic, just from a safety standpoint?
Yeah, well, all of our reporting suffered from having to shift our completely standard practice of just going out and striking up conversation with regular community members every day, to just like countless phone interviews and emails. And often, I mean, that first initial personal in-person connection you build with someone is often critical to writing an accurate story that puts someone at ease as well, instead of just like calling them up and being like, hey, you've never seen me, but tell me about the crisis you're going through. But homelessness is an area particularly where remote reporting just simply was not possible. You know, I did like bulk of my reporting from home this past year, but I ended up spending a lot of time at homeless encampments. People don't always have reliable phone service or internet connection. And often there was just news happening directly at those sites. If it was the city or state was trying to close down an encampment, for example. So I did venture out, you know, not nearly as much as if I had felt like I was not putting anyone's safety at risk by doing that, or my own, then I would have done it a whole lot more. But there's just some things you can't get around in our job. And covering homelessness is one of them. I will say, Amir and I just did what was my first interview inside someone's apartment in like 15 months this week, which was thrilling. He and I went to, there's this guy who goes by Pastor Preston Walker, who is a well-known unhoused activist in Oakland and Berkeley for many years. He just landed in some subsidized housing in Fremont, actually, and we went out there to talk to him. He's someone that I've interviewed many times over the phone this past year, but being able to be in his turf, the candid, authentic setting of being inside someone's own home, it was just a world of difference, and we had a really.
Were you anxious though? Did it feel weird to actually be in close proximity?
It did a little bit, yeah.
How about you, Amir? Was it like odd, or like what? Did you just walk in and start taking photos?
No, I kind of hang back for a while. I just get acclimated, and I let just have a conversation. But it is kind of different to be in people's homes now. Yeah, definitely was odd in a way.
Jacob, can you give us a little bit more perspective on just like, again, the newsroom was kind of born in the pandemic. So how did you guys kind of build even just the internal culture and working relationships? Like, what were your tactics, and then also, since I think we've got some technical issues with Tasneem, would you share a little bit about the community advisory cohort that's been mentioned?
Yeah, for sure. Happy to do both of those things. So in terms of, building the culture of the newsroom during the pandemic, it was interesting. I'll just sort of share a story with you from the very early days of, our organization and beginning to build it. Actually, before any of the reporters came on board, the first 3 people who joined the organization were Tasneem and Darwin and I. And for the first month or so, we would once or twice a week, we would actually get together. We would mask up and we would get together in a park. And we chose different parks every time. And so we were sort of exploring the city parks while we were also having very deep conversation about the type of newsroom we aspired to build. And those were really exciting conversations. And I think it was just sort of the seeds of just sort of the culture that we wanted to create in our newsroom.
Give us an example. Like, so you go to the picnic table at Diamond, or like you were at Brookdale Park? Like, where were you?
Yeah, I'll give you one example. I mean, we're literally like sitting on the grass at Diamond Park, with a notepad, just having conversations about journalism in Oakland and what we wanted to do, and just sort of like dreaming. It started with really just dreaming about what we thought we might want to do, and what kind of organization did we want to create and be a part of. So those were really formative conversations for us, and that was part of it, but then we bring on a team, and the pandemic got worse, right? I mean, we had these spikes throughout the summer where like getting together really was just not, in any form or fashion, was not going to happen. And so, I think, we just did that in this virtual space like so many people have. And I think it was just, again, kind of going back to, even though we couldn't meet physically, carving out the time in our week to just have conversations, and to hit the ground running, but also I think set a pace for ourselves as a news organization that wasn't where we weren't just going to be killing ourselves to produce the news, but we were going to be very thoughtful about what we were reporting, how we were reporting, and making sure that every week we were having deep conversations about why we do what we do. And I think in the course of that, process, the culture was sort of created and established. At least I hope, I like to think so.
So I think we're going to get Tasneem back in a minute. So I'm going to, let me just go a little bit further on this, because Azu, I think you've been talked about the fruit bale. 94601, the area code, I think for many months had the worst positive COVID test rates. Driven by, I think, a large Mayan population that's moved into Oakland in the last 10 years. They're mum speakers. They don't, Spanish is not their first language. You're doing arts and community. Of course, COVID impacted community, but it's a story across every single conceivable vertical of coverage. At what point as a reporter did you realize like everything's a COVID story on some level while we're in the intensity, especially when it was peaking so dangerously in that part of Oakland?
When the pandemic hit, I was still a freelancer, and I had about 6 stories in the works between the Bull Italic and KQED. Shout out to them. And obviously, all the stories were dropped. And early on when the pandemic started, I knew that I had to shift into, pandemic reporting mode. But most importantly, I knew that it was crucial for me to utilize my voice as a journalist and start reporting about how the undocumented community, especially in Fruitvale, was being affected. And so one of the first stories that I did, I didn't even know who to pitch it to. I was just kind of scrambling. So I talked to Scott Morris, another journalist, and at the time he was, kind of starting a website of sorts to house some of his stories. So I said, hey, I have this list of resources for folks. I want to run it in Spanish. Can I run it on your site? Because I just don't have time. I don't know who to pitch it to. And he's like, yeah, let's do it. So we ran it both in English and Spanish. And then I think it right after, I think it's when I got connected with Darwin and Tasneem. And I said, hey, I know you guys are not hiring right at this moment because of what happened with the pandemic, but I would really like to start reporting about how the pandemic is affecting the undocumented community. And I think one of the first stories that I did with Oaklandside, we were being hosted on the Berkeley side at the time, was the efforts by Street Level Health Project, which is a nonprofit that focuses on helping day labor workers in the MAM community in Fruitvale. That was one of the first stories that I did on the efforts with them, trying to get them, at the time, not even COVID tests, because it wasn't, the COVID testing wasn't even a thing yet. But, about kind of try to stay safe, mask up, give out food. That was one of the first stories I did. And then, from there it was okay, COVID testing is a thing. Let's get a guide. I went and got tested and, to kind of let people know, hey, this is what it's like to get tested. This is the process. Here's a list of places. So I think pretty much most of last year, my reporting was heavily focused on the pandemic, but specifically on how the undocumented community was being affected by the pandemic.
You mentioned the guide, and I think we have Tasneem back. Are you with us, Tasneem?
You tell me.
We have you, and it's a location change. That's great. Good to get you outside. So now I've got two questions stacked up for you, Tasneem, and maybe you can blend them, right? We've been waiting for you to describe this community advisory cohort, but also you use the word guide, Azu, and the Oaklandside has produced a number of guides around the election, around COVID, of course. Can you give us a little bit of perspective on both of those things and that very direct public service that a newsroom should be responsible for?
Absolutely. Thank you so much, everybody, for bearing with me. And it's great to finally get to answer this very important question about our mission metrics cohort. So from the beginning, we knew that community listening was going to be crucial to the work and the success of our journalism. It's not enough to put out stories and just kind of hit publish and say rinse and repeat and move on. We have to be in communication with audiences across the city who we are hoping will find value in our work. And, getting awards and things like that, that's great. And that is one indication that our work has value, but it's really not the only one that matters to us, nor is things like traffic. It's those one-on-one conversations that we also are looking to learn from. So we decided to try and create essentially a community advisory board. We've just finished our first pilot program of this group. We reached out to community leaders, stakeholders, community organizations to get their help in connecting with people who aren't necessarily already very plugged into the Oakland side, aren't necessarily people that, a lot of people across Oakland will be familiar with, but who care deeply about what journalism can do for this city. And we ended up finding one community representative from each city council district. This is a group that, in terms of age and life experiences and race and ethnicity, tenure in Oakland, represents, the communities that we're hoping to serve. And we especially prioritized for this first group people who've been in Oakland for a long time. That was one of our main priorities for this group. So what we do is every week we send them a handful of our stories from the week before, and we have a whole series of questions that we ask. Does this story, represent communities that you belong to in Oakland? Does this story represent blind spots that we might have in newsroom? Does it bring value to your life, to your everyday existence here in Oakland? Did you learn something from it? How could we do better? How could this story have served you better? And through this process, we have also met with our community advisors, a couple times to have more of those like one-on-one conversations about the big picture of Oaklandside and the big picture of what it is they're getting or not getting from our journalism. And this is the kind of work that, when we go out there and we say we're trying to be a community-centered newsroom, this is a really crucial part of that, because it's that collaboration with paid. I'd like to also mention we made sure to secure enough funding that we could pay all of these advisors for their time. And it's that collaboration and that relationship and that partnership where we're learning on an ongoing basis. That learning, first of all, in too many of the newsrooms that I've been involved with in the past, that learning kind of never happens, that type of listening to community. We made a big effort to do that when we first launched this newsroom, but we knew we weren't going to stop there. It has to be something that is ongoing. And to make that happen, we knew that we were going to have to do it in kind of a systematic, programmatic way, the way that we've tried to approach so many other things with our work.
And in your work with this community advisory board, how much do they sort of understand and relate to what the actual economics are? Because Azu mentioned being a freelancer, and just raise your hand if you've worked as a freelancer as a journalist. Right. So this is true for many journalists, right? There's not a lot of jobs, right? There's almost no jobs in Oakland before Oaklandside. There's some. KLW has a team that's based in Oakland, and thumbs up to them for having that. But it's often very difficult to actually just make a living doing it. I'm interested, like, how much of the nonprofit model, like how deep did you go with the community advisory board about how Oaklandside actually is able to exist?
Yeah, it's not really the thrust of the work that we were asking them to engage with us on. Part of what we wanted to learn from them actually was related to sustainability, in that, we know the resources that go into reporting a story. When we get questions from the community advisors about what else they wanted from the story, it then gives us something to work off of, to say, okay, our newsroom is going to grow in the future, right? We are a team of 8 right now. We are adding a city hall and policing reporter very shortly. A year from now, 5 years from now, our newsroom will look very different than it does today. Hopefully, right, if everything succeeds and goes the way we want it to. And we need data. We need information about the directions in which we're going to grow this newsroom. And the feedback we get from our community advisors actually plays a critical role, just as the feedback we got from community members who we spoke to when we launched this newsroom and helped us determine the beats that we were going to cover based on the questions we were asking them about what they wanted from journalism in Oakland. I shared, earlier in our 3-day event here, the story of how we weren't necessarily initially thinking about hiring an arts and community reporter. We were thinking about, we know that a crisis is happening. We were thinking more about, hard news. And in those conversations with community members, they talked about the importance of somebody who was going to be out there covering the arts and culture and community scenes of Oakland. And that changed our thinking. That actually led to us deciding to invest in the beat that Azucena has covered so beautifully. So I would say that in terms of sustainability, what we're learning from our community members about the questions we didn't have the resources to answer the first time around when we did these stories, that's one of the first places we're going to go to when we say, how is our newsroom going to grow next?
I want to spend a little bit of time on something that enriches and the city of Oakland depends on, and is also deeply, deeply embedded all across the city, and that's advocacy and political activism, and a deep, deep commitment to social justice. Ashley, I'm coming to you with this because there's a whole range of examples here, from public health to police accountability, but public education, Oakland has some deep roots on that issue. And when you're covering the schools, how do you manage a relationship with advocacy organization and advocates who often are parents and teachers themselves? But does it complicate your ability to do the reporting? Do folks expect you to kind of go one way because they are very deeply committed to a certain angle or are part of the work? And again, no judgment. I was raised by an activist and advocacy family myself, but how do you manage that?
That's a really good question. I do talk a lot to education advocates and activists, and they're a really important part of the education landscape. I think that it's important to portray all sides of an issue. And so, for example, charter schools are kind of like a big lightning rod of a political issue. And I, at times, cover the politics of charter schools, but they're also just schools, and so they deserve the same kind of coverage that the school district schools deserve.
Yeah, and well, let me ask the same question, Ricky, in terms of small business and the dynamics between the downtown core and the neighborhoods and what are wealthier parts of the city versus more working class. How do those dynamics come out in your coverage?
Yeah, that's a really interesting question. I feel like so the way my beat initially started, this is how I answer it, was the focus was immigrant-owned businesses. So I think still to this day, that's always the crux of my reporting. So whether I've done like several articles about one like highlighting the Diamond District and how businesses have been doing there, done stuff about the Northgate region, downtown, and a lot of times I've found that the businesses that are more willing to talk tend to be the ones with more capital, people who are, I guess, more media savvy, and so I actively avoid those a lot of the times. Like, it takes more effort to speak to immigrant-owned businesses and businesses owned by people of color because there's this obvious and like righteous distrust of journalists. And I come from a community myself that doesn't necessarily trust journalists, which is why I wanted to be one. But it's worth it. It's worth it. And then so having that intentionality, I think, comes out. I don't know if I quite answered your question.
No, you did. And what community do you come from? Tell us.
I come from East LA. So to be specific, El Monte. And it reminds me a lot of Oakland. It's fully gentrified now, so that makes me sad. But when I see small businesses in Oakland, it gives me a snapshot into how I grew up and the communities that were around me. And so I tried to take the lessons that I learned from the immigrant communities that I grew up in and try to apply that to this beat.
And Joaquin, if I may jump in, you were asking about public service journalism and guides for the community earlier. And Ricky, I think on his beat has provided such a great example of what we can do here. His coverage is sometimes not only focused on profiling and telling the stories of small businesses, immigrant-owned businesses across Oakland, but also stories that are going to be directly relevant to helping them figure things out. So for instance, hey, there's COVID relief funds coming from the state. What do you need to know about them? In some cases, how can we get some of these stories, these guides really translated so that as many types of business owners across our community can access them? Sometimes it's, hey, there's a form you can fill out, a website you can access to get some type of resources, but it's actually really complicated and confusing to navigate. How can we do a story that helps people stay on top of the deadlines and just like navigate these systems? So that's a big part of Ricky's work as well. And then more broadly, that's a big part of the approach that we've taken in our newsroom, from anything from our wildly popular COVID guide, where we really didn't just approach this as a story. We're really committed to trying to meet people where they're at. And perhaps while I was dealing with technical difficulties, did you guys talk about our text messaging campaign at all?
No, share it.
Yeah, absolutely. Happy to. We were thinking here, like, of course, we're going to be covering the state rollout of the vaccination distribution system. Of course, we're going to be covering shortfalls in how these vaccines may or may not be getting to different communities in our city. But we also just want to make it easy for people to get vaccinated. Like, we think that that's something that a local newsroom can and should do. So we started a whole campaign. We had a fundraiser around this, and we invited people to help us print out flyers and postcards that we would distribute all over the zip codes in Oakland that have been the hardest hit by COVID-19. And these flyers and postcards were aimed at getting people to know about this free text messaging service that we provided, where anybody could ask us anything, nuts and bolts, from the most basic question to the most complicated question about, you know, hey, I'm somebody who is housebound. It's not easy for me to get to the Coliseum site. Like, what can I do? They text us this question, and an actual person, a reporter who we assigned to take on all of our COVID vaccine coverage, will write you back. And in some cases end up going back and forth with people for days, and making sure that they have the information that they need. They may not be aware of, you know, different types of services aimed at helping people get transported to, you know, the Coliseum site or other vaccination sites, from Lyft to, you know, public transportation access. And we were always thrilled when someone would write us and say, hey, you guys can take me off of this, you know, text chain now because you helped me get vaccinated. I don't need you anymore. So nearly 3,000 people signed up for that service. Well over 200,000 people read our online guide to getting vaccinated. There were times where we were updating that thing like every single day. And the question we got...
Let me just click in here for a second. So it's providing almost a help desk service.
Right.
On core issues that you're going to report on, but then there's also basic information is necessary for them.
Yeah, absolutely. And we had people say, I didn't know this is something local newsrooms did. Like, this isn't a story that you're doing. It's something else. And that's something else, like, we squarely see as journalism. We don't think it's one or the other. And out of some of these conversations we were having with community members, like, reporting emerged. We were hearing that people were really confused about vaccine access codes. I'm sure we all remember those, you know, wild, wild west days of these vaccine access codes. And we were getting people saying, I got this code. Should I use it? Is it okay? Or how do I get a code? And so then that would turn into reporting. So there was a great feedback cycle between these two types of journalism we were doing.
So I want to do a little breadcrumb trail as we sort of get to the last inning here of our conversation. And Oakland is a city of many intersections. We've talked geographically, we've talked politically, socially, but as reporters, I'd love for you, each one of you, to share an actual intersection in Oakland. Like Azu, you said Fruitvale and East 14th. Old timers call it East 14th. New, you know, now it's international, but it's still East 14th to me. I want to know, like, in your work in the last year, give me an intersection. Give me a character and a story that you think represents the work that you've done. Or shout out one of your peers here in terms of the coverage that they've done about our city and our community. And Natalie, I'm going to start with you.
Okay. I would take us to West Oakland, specifically Wood Street and 24th. Really, any of the, you could have a publication that each of the beats was a different block of Wood Street. It's one of Oakland's largest unhoused encampments, but it's also the site of a lot of activism among unhoused people, and resistance and creativity. The character that you met, if you watched yesterday's segment, Maven Carter Griffin, is kind of embodies a lot of the spirit of the community at Wood Street. It's a world where a lot of just the issues, everything from what's plaguing Oakland to what's so beautiful about Oakland all kind of intersects. There's this community there called Cobb on Wood, where some nonprofit organizations and some unhoused people there, and just interested community members have built these Cobb structures there. And there's like a whole little city in this one little, 20-foot radius place in on the Wood Street encampment. They have a convenience store there, they have a kitchen, they have a free store, and an amphitheater. So there's it's a microcosm, like every single intersection is of Oakland. And it's also the site of development plans. It's the site of protests against the development plans. So yeah, I could spend a whole year there.
No, you're setting the bar high. This is going way better than I thought it would. Okay, Ashley, you're up.
Okay, that's a hard question because I don't know that there's a specific location I've been to a lot in Oakland, but you also mentioned mentioning like a person and a story or an organization. But one thing I haven't talked about is the movement to like end school police in Oakland. That was a really huge story last year, and it was really pushed forward by youth and also by the Black Organizing Project. So I'm really grateful that those groups and those students allowed me to, cover their story.
Excellent. Azu.
I'm gonna say the corner of 17th and Broadway, and I'll briefly explain why. There's a mural right at the corner, two murals actually, one on Broadway and one on 17th. And that's by an artist named Jorge Vegarano. He goes by Abstract Oakland on Instagram. I found out about him through another story that I reported years ago. His work was being shown at a gallery that I wrote about. Fast forward, during the pandemic, he created the town loteria. And so through Instagram, I found out about it because I follow him. I wanted to write about it. I wrote about him, did this great story. And from there, he has exploded. His artwork is now, so he went and Oaklandish started selling his town loteria. They did a collaboration with him with t-shirts. And then now all of his artwork is being shown in the Blind Spotting TV show. So if you guys watch the story, it's plastered all over. And then for the premiere in LA, his artwork was the background for the red carpet event. So I'm corner of 17 and Broadway. That's where you see his work.
All right, Darwin, you're up.
Yeah, I'm gonna say 96th Avenue and Cherry Street. I remember I think it was a Sunday. It was June 6th, 2020, and so it was kind of right during or in the immediate aftermath of the George Floyd protests all over the country and in Oakland. And it was early in the morning, and I woke up and I realized that there had been this really controversial police shooting out in East Oakland, and it looked like California Highway Patrol officers had pulled a car over. And then when the car sort of may have sped away from them or at them, depending on who you believe, they shot into it, and they ended up killing a young man named Eric Salgado, and they wounded his girlfriend, Brianna Colombo. And I remember going out to that street, to Cherry Street, that morning, and I remember seeing Mr. Salgado's family was there, and I remember his mother had a bullet fragment she had found on the ground, and it sunk in right there how disturbing that incident was. And so over the past year, we've done a ton of reporting on it, and I've been astounded by the secrecy of law enforcement in this one particular case. It's unlike anything I've seen in many years. But yeah, 96th Avenue and Cherry Street in East Oakland. Okay, Ricky.
Yeah, I got so many. My ADHD brain was going crazy. But I'm working on a project that's going to be published soon with my talented colleague from the Berkeley side, Supriya Yelimelli, about Telegraph Avenue. So it's basically the entirety of it, from where it starts in downtown all the way to UC Berkeley campus. And so I think about all those different intersections and how much change has happened with those businesses. Some of it is great, some of it is bittersweet, some of it is still sad. But two other ones that came to my mind just because they're fresh is Apartment C, which is I believe 89th and International, and then Allen Temple Baptist Church, which is 85th and International, and those two, you know, blocks away of each other. I consider them both to be small businesses, and they both have very different purposes, but at the same time, they're neighborhood staples, and they are community hubs, and they represent something like very great about that area, I think. And those intersections particularly came out to me because of just remember what Martin and Soledad were talking about on the very first day, and the perception of Oakland as a whole, but then also like East Oakland, and you know what people across the bay, you know, just those, like, honestly just terrible perception of Oakland. And those two places, to me, those two intersections, like, of course they have the issues, but they represent what's great about the area. They represent what's great about Oakland.
Great. All of these are very poignant and sort of pulling at my emotional core around this city. Jacob.
Yeah, the first place that comes to mind for me definitely is 73rd and Foothill, 73rd Avenue and Foothill, and that's the location of a park, Liberation Park, which is a community space that's popped up over the last year. Really, it's really kind of taken shape under the leadership of the Black Cultural Zone. And on the day of the Derek Chauvin verdict, when that news broke, Amir and I went down to Liberation Park because that's where community were gathering to just sort of process that decision and just hold space. And so we went down there and, you know, spoke to people, interviewed folks, and Amir took some photos. And it's the same location where, you know, I later returned to have a conversation with community members about gun violence that we played as part of this one-year program and special. And so, and we've done other pieces of reporting sort of centered on that space as well, which has really become, in a lot of ways, sort of just sort of a focal point for a lot of the movement building that's happening in East Oakland around not just violence prevention, but also economic development that's really community driven. And so, yeah, that's what comes to mind for me.
And that was a great conversation, going back to an earlier video, which will be archived and available. Tasneem, and then we'll close with you, Amir, but Tasneem, take it away.
Yeah, Jacob took mine because I was really looking forward to talking about Amir's incredible portraits from that reporting, you know, that report that Jacob and Amir collaborated on.
Jacob stole mine too.
Yeah.
Yeah, go ahead.
Well, I'll try to stall Amir so he can come up with another one. I'm going to go to 43rd and Broadway and the front lawn of Oakland Tech, which is not far from where I live. And a report that Darwin did at the height of the George Floyd protests and Breonna Taylor protests against police brutality and police violence, where we really decided to spotlight the work of student leaders. And this is so much of the work that Ashley does on her beat, to talk about the fact that student leaders, youth leaders organized a march of 15,000 people from Oakland Tech to downtown. And then that ended, there's kind of a bookend here, that ended up, you know, downtown later that day with a protest that was lawfully gathered and ended up being fired on by Oakland police officers and law enforcement officers from other municipalities ahead of a curfew, 20 minutes ahead of a curfew. And this was a case that we investigated very, very thoroughly, very, very intensely. The claim was that people in the crowd were preparing Molotov cocktails, were going to be throwing bricks at the police line. And our team just exhaustively reviewed video footage and social media posts and civilian testimony, found no evidence of that. And here we are 1 year later. And in fact, OPD has confirmed our investigation.
Also, incredibly powerful. And both of my kids graduated from Oakland Tech. And I'll just a quick anecdote. I'm buying you a little bit more time, Amir, because I'm going to add an assignment to this. The day after Trump was elected president was a confusing day and a setting day for many people in our community. And my wife and I, it was my birthday, went and had a cup of coffee. I visited my mom's gravesite up at the cemetery. And we saw these helicopters hovering around Oakland Tech. And at that time, my daughter was still in school there. And we came up over the hill and all the kids were out in the street. And it would just like turn my entire mood around in that moment. And gave me a lot of inspiration, frankly. So I love that you called out the Oakland Tech Go Bulldogs. Amir, here's the thing I want you to do extra for us, Amir, though. You're our visual journalist. So if you have one shot, one frame, one photo to like leave us with, describe to us, if you had to show Oakland and the work that you guys are doing in one picture, what is it?
Before Amir goes, can I add an intersection? I thought of one.
Ashley, get in here. Yes. Amir, you got a little extra time.
Okay. So I thought about El Paseo Drive, and I think the cross street is Topanga in Sobrante Park. And that's the location of Madison Park Primary School, which is a school in East Oakland. And on the first day of in-person classes in OUSD, that's the school that they allowed media to go to. And it was a really exciting day. You know, kids and parents were really happy to be going back to school. But my memory from that day is the first kid who came to school when it was noon was when the students were supposed to start coming. His name was Steven, and he was this 5-year-old kid, and all the media were there, and they just like surrounded him like with their giant cameras and microphones, like this little kid whose backpack is bigger than him, like asking, you know, what do you think about the school day? He probably didn't think anything special, but I thought that just encapsulated like the past year, the craziness of the past year.
Awesome. And thank you, Ashley, for coming back around with that. Okay, Amir, give it to us.
You know, it's actually easier for me to answer as the intersection. I've done so many stories for Oaklandside by now. I would need a day to come up with one image that can tell the length and deepness of the work that we do. But to actually mention the intersection, I do want to mention 90th and Hillside. And a story we did there was about, it was early for me, not early in the pandemic, but there was a mother and her son, and the son was getting into in-home learning, and it was pretty difficult for him. And she was telling that story. But what really brought me to this intersection is I grew up a block away on Thermal, and I really want to emphasize the Deep East Oakland reporting at large by Oaklandside, and how important it is to bring attention to stories that are in this community. I've done reporting for publications on Deep East Oakland before, and they were all about violence. They were all about crime. And I thought, wow, like, I get it. You know, it's news, but also there's so much more here. Even 90th by itself, you know, there's this beautiful, I guess you call it a mural, but it's along the street, and it's a collaboration with Scraper Bike team and the city and some other folks who are well deserving of praise that beautified, you know, the street. And it's a street I've gone down my whole life. So when I returned here to do this story, I thought, wow, these are the stories, you know, I wanted to do all along, just about families and about arts and culture. And, you know, 2 blocks away, you got Castlemont. I didn't go to Castlemont. I went to Tech and Far West. Shout out to Bulldogs and Falcons. But my mom went to Castlemont, you know, my aunt went to Castlemont, my cousin went to Castlemont. And just that, you know, maybe 4 or 5 block radius from Youth Uprising, which I also went to like 98, 10 blocks then, is really crucial to me. And to go there and tell stories about the community and the lives that they live beyond crime, as Tasneem mentioned before, that we cover as a public health issue, that's really important to me. And I think that focus is unique to how we approach stories.
And if I may, if Amir doesn't have a favorite of his photos, I have a recent favorite. It's impossible to pick one from Amir's, you know, entire portfolio with the Oaklandside. That really would take me hours as well. But if you haven't already, check out a recent story by Natalie, which features incredible photography by Amir on an attempt to revive the 7th Street corridor, a really important Black business corridor in West Oakland, and especially folks who are coming up with some really creative solutions to try and revitalize and bring back Esther's Orbit Room. And the portrait that Amir took of Noni Sessions, the woman who is behind this, this push to revitalize Esther's Orbit Room, I just think it has it all. I mean, it's got, this beautiful portrait of Noni, this incredible look at, at how Esther's looks today. So if you haven't checked out that story, and maybe somebody can drop it into the chat here, I just think this really showcases the best of what happens when a reporter and a really talented reporter and a really talented visual journalist are able to work together.
Well, thank you all. This has been an extraordinary conversation. I let us run a little longer than I thought we even would, but we could go for another hour or two if everyone's got time. Just kidding. And Amir, I want to just underscore something that you said, right? Which is there's a difference between what we're trying to do and what usually happens around coverage in our community. Soledad O'Brien talked about that. Martin talked about that. But it is a work in progress, and it will continue to be a work in progress. And you guys are the people doing the work. So really thank you for that. And thanks for being a part of these last couple of days and being the Oaklandside newsroom. Thank you, guys.
Thank you so much, Joaquin.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.